I got to tell you, I love that introduction. I think that's really a
I
lot
was
of fun.
dancing along. Yeah.
Hey, listen, welcome everybody to today's session of Vantage Point on organizational culture. You know how top leaders use recognition to shape culture and impact the bottom line. Today we'll share insights on how to enhance leadership empathy as we return to the new post normal, or the new COVID post normal, or the new normal, or you know what I'm trying to say here. Don't you? Our guests want to share their ideas, their tools, their experience on how they've done it in their organizations. And always with me today is my co-author, my business partner, and my dear friend, Adrian Gostick. Wave to the crowd, Adrian.
Well, thanks, Jess. And we want to thank our sponsor, Vantage Circle, which is a employee engagement recognition company that was just awarded the Brandon Hall Excellence Award and the silver for Best Advance in Employee Engagement category, and also named as one of the top recognition providers in the HRO Today's Baker's Dozen list for 2022. So we want to thank them for putting this all together for us today. We have three amazing guests to bring you. We're going to discuss this topic of employee engagement and culture and recognition today. Angel Lowe is Vice President of Global Human Resources at Atcor. She has responsibility for talent acquisition, development, onboarding, immersion, leadership training, employee development, and employee and labor relations. She has 4,700 employees she cares for, with manufacturing and distribution facilities worldwide. And Atcor is a leading provider of electrical, safety, and infrastructure solutions. Jeanne Tung is Director of Business Development and Workforce Partnerships at Henry Street Settlement. She'll tell us more about that, but it's a nonprofit social service agency on the Lower East Side in the neighborhood of Manhattan, and it provides social services, arts programs, and healthcare services to New Yorkers. Prior to that, she was righting wrongs for the Asian American community as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney. And Jennifer McCollum, our dear friend, is CEO of Linkage, Inc. That's a 34-year-old leadership development firm whose mission is to change the face of leadership. Linkage works with organizations globally to advance women and accelerate inclusion in leaders and organizations. Jennifer's also a keynote speaker, consultant, author, and a fellow member of the Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches. Now, we want to start with Angel here. Now, this idea of culture, we have people joining us from around the world. Maybe help us understand what you think really makes and creates an effective culture and how you've gone about defining and building a great culture at Atcor.
Thank you, Adrian, and thanks for having us today. When we think of culture at Atcor, it's very, very important to us, right? The things we focus on is really our behaviors. So it starts at the top. It starts with the CEO, and the other officers within the company, right? And it permeates throughout the organization. Our culture at Atcor is built on 5 core values. So the values are very important to us, and those are accountability, teamwork, integrity, respect, and excellence. And we model those behaviors or behaviors associated with those values every day, and we have expectations for our employees to do the same. And then built on top of those values, we have a culture of what we call engagement and alignment. And engagement and alignment really means that as an engaged employee, we are striving to be a standout, or staying focused on being a standout leader. We're striving for breakthrough results, and we're supporting the decisions of the leadership team after robust debate. And the robust debate is important because we're a continuous improvement company, and we encourage our employees to challenge the status quo, right? We want to hear their voice. We want to hear from them. So if we do those things, we're engaged. And then to be aligned, what we really do is we live our Atcor mission and values. We learn our strategic priorities and the direction that the company is going, and then we link our individual goals to those strategic priorities, so that we're like a crew team, we're all rowing in the same direction to reach the same goal or the same point. And we find that environment, so if you think about it, it's a foundation. We find that foundation is critical and crucial to our culture.
Well, let's go to Jennifer next then. Because at Linkage, you are the CEO of Linkage. You've got an organization you're worrying about, and you work with organizations around the world on their cultural issues as well. So what are you seeing? Let's understand what makes an effective culture from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Adrienne. I mean, I will say that coming out of this COVID pandemic, this real hyper focus on culture has become even more important because we're talking about things, whether we're supporting and consulting with other organizations or looking at our own organizations, we're talking about things like the Great Resignation. We're talking about things like quiet quitting, which is the latest buzzword now. And we're working both individually and collectively as leaders to what do we do to do a couple things. And Angel, I think what you're doing at AdCore is really, really comprehensive. How do you make that tangibly come to life every single day? So mission, as an example, the mission at Linkage is to change the face of leadership. Do we all know what that means? Are we all tying our own personal purpose to that organizational purpose? Strategy. Business planning. Do we see how our individual roles actually impact our organizational direction and strategy? Values, which I think, Angel, you articulated beautifully. Are we celebrating and noticing when our individuals and our teams are living those values? And so that's where the recognition piece, I think, becomes really important, because we know we feel more included. We feel like we belong. We feel like we're creating a culture when we see our role tied to it, and we feel like we're celebrated.
You know, that's I love both of your perspectives here. Jeanne, I'm interested from your perspective too. As you've worked, look, as an attorney, you're now in a nonprofit. What do you see from this idea overall? Help us define culture and where we begin with this process.
Yeah, I mean, Angel and Jennifer touched on a lot of similar things as the nonprofit world and at Henry Street Settlement. Our mission is fighting against poverty. And as you know, one doesn't go into the not-for-profit work for the money. So, recognition is key. We rely very heavily on our mission. Right at the front of our door, we state our principles that each of us is whole and worthy, that poverty is a social issue, not an individual failing. There is power in bridging differences. Our neighbors matter, and in times of need, we have to act. So those are our guiding principles, and that's why our staff come to work at Henry Street Settlement, because it speaks to them, those values.
It is really interesting too, in your world in particular, that mission and vision really has to speak to people's emotions and their hearts, doesn't it? Because like it's in your name, nonprofit. You're not going to go in there to say spectacularly wealthy. Talk a little bit about the recognition piece. What are some of the things that you do in lieu of being able to pay big salaries that keeps your people engaged and working on that vision and mission?
So a lot of it is the tangible results that we see in the people that we serve. And we have an excellent marketing and communications team that collects success stories. We highlight success stories and we share them so that we all know, because we are working across a campus of 18 different locations. We're involved with many different programs, and it's great that we are making sure that marketing and communications lets everyone share the success stories, and we know what is happening to individuals that we serve. We also have annual milestones recognition. We have above and beyond awards. We have team building activities and retreats, directors' dinners, and then affinity groups so that like parents can come together and talk about the work-life balance and making sure that we're supported and we're supporting each other. We do have pillar teams established in our human resources. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of the pillar teams, but there's also health and wellness, recruitment and retention, professional training and development, as well as a group for social workers. And a lot of those groups overlap in terms of recommendations and the work that's being done. But we also do a lot of fun things, like we have a Halloween costume contest every year, which is great. Our executive director and CEO is just such a fun person and really accessible.
It is interesting. When we think of recognition, sometimes we go to a place where it's a plaque or it's a watch or something. And I think, Jeanne, you've touched on a couple of really interesting concepts here. the storytelling being so important and the variety of ways that you recognize. So Angel, I want to go to you at Atcor. You say it starts with the CEO living the values and so on. Well, what are some of the recognition practices that you've seen that works really well? I know Atcor in particular is a lot about development, leadership development and personal development. Can you speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do, much like Jeanne, we have lots of programs within AdCore, right? There is career development. We do have resource groups. And then we also have what we call our SPOT award, and it's an above and beyond. People who go above and beyond, they're recognized on the spot, and that's usually a monetary award of some sort. And I think so, along with the same line and along the same programs, I think those are all very, very important, right? People receive recognition through LinkedIn. We do a lot of celebrations on LinkedIn, and we recognize our employees. But one of the things that I really want to touch on is often people think, when they think recognition, they think it has to be tied to some type of pay or some type of monetary award. And actually, it doesn't. And some of the most effective recognition is not tied to something monetary. So like Jeanne mentioned, and the programs she has, they're not monetary programs, but they're very, very impactful. And one of the things that we have found at AdCore as we talk about it starting from the top is, for example, our CEO, Bill Waltz, he'll go to lunch or he'll go to dinner with employees, which he does often, several times a week, and just have a general discussion. How are you doing? How is everything going? Well, that's a recognition for that individual, but that individual will also talk about their team. And what Bill will personally do is within the next 24 to 48 hours, he goes back to his desk and he will send the individuals that were mentioned a personal email that says, hey, for example, hey, Angel, I had lunch with so-and-so today, and they were very complimentary of XYZ. Thank you so much for all that you've done. Thank you for your contributions. And he will do that ongoing often. And those are types of recognition that just really, they're personal. They mean a lot. Employees see that their hard work and their efforts are being recognized. And they're priceless, right? You can't put a price on those. And so those are just some of the things that we do at AdCore. We try to make sure we're modeling our values and that we're very approachable and work very collaboratively with all of our employees.
You got to love that personal touch, right? The personal touch means so much. And Jen, we want to get over to you as well, because you see not only what you're doing at Linkage, you've got views of lots of different companies. What have you seen that's been impactful?
Well, what I was going to add, because a lot of what we're talking about is top-down recognition, which I think is really important because a lot of times, all the time, culture really does start at the top. But I think there's also a lot of value in recognition of each other at all levels.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've seen, it's actually one of the things we do, is called the Superpower Showcase, which we ask our employees to nominate others by acknowledging their strength, their uniqueness, their superpowers. And then that employee is asked to or gets to create a very simple kind of 5-minute video and post it onto our intranet site, where they talk about how those superpowers come to life in their role, maybe some things that are surprising or unique about them, and then what they love about their role and about their job and about their team. And then that kind of piles on where everyone is acknowledging each other on that team, and the next person gets nominated. So it becomes this kind of reinforcing loop at the individual and the team level. So it doesn't always have to start top down. I love the idea of this cross celebration of each other.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quick on that. So Jennifer, what is your superpower? I mean, inquiring minds want to know.
Thank you for asking. So I think my superpower comes with kind of inspiration and vision, and the ability to paint a picture of where we're going into the future and to kind of rally teams around that. And that's one of the things I get to do every day in my job.
Knowing you, I could see that. Yeah. So let's use your crystal ball a little bit too, Jennifer, and tell us where, if it starts with organizational culture, where are we going right now? We've come through 2.5 years of kind of madness, and we've tried lots of different things in all of our cultures. Some things we want to keep going because they were good. Some things we may discard. So what do you see that's different with culture than maybe 3 years ago? And what should we keep going with that we've learned over these last couple of years?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take because I'm actually really curious about all of your input on this. I'd like to just drop into our conversation some of the research that we just published over the last few years as we're looking at this idea of inclusion. And so this is really surfaced at the leadership level and the organizational level. And I think it really lends to exceptional cultures when people feel, and we define it, and many do as well, as the ability to feel like my uniqueness is recognized and valued and feel like I belong. So the three levers that organizations can pull to become more inclusive are these. And it starts at the top. And I think we've talked about this already, where executives are leading by example. They are fair, they're welcoming, they're equitable. And we're seeing a huge emergence of executives really becoming aware of what do I need to do to change, to lead more inclusively, and to maybe be more effective at my executive sponsorship and helping others rise. So that's number one. The second is leaders. Leaders discover the uniqueness, the superpowers, as we've just been talking about, of each one of their team members. And those superpowers are acknowledged and they're honored. And most importantly, they're used to drive critical goals and the strategic priorities of the company. So the individuals feel like their uniqueness is being leveraged. And the third is for the workforce writ large. And this is probably the one that's been the trickiest in this COVID world, when meetings, this kind of this language and structure of business has just changed so dramatically. We're all on video now. We're all virtual, now hybrid. It's very confusing. How can we all in the workforce create the culture of inclusivity in our day-to-day interactions? And what does that mean when some of us are on the web and some of us are in the office? And so teaching the workforce how to become allies and friends at work, in meetings, how everybody can feel more included. Those are the three levers that that surfaced in our research. So I just wanted to stop there and see what you all think.
Angel, Jeanne, what do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously completely agree with the levers. And I think one of the things that is very, very important at the inclusivity and the way we look at it at AdCore is, when we think about inclusion, and we have a goal within our talent commitment action plan that is to leverage an inclusive leadership mindset as a competitive advantage. And one of the things that we really look at with that is, how do we allow all of our employees to come to the table and bring their unique individual selves, everything they have, whether it be race, gender, ethnicity, work experiences, cultural experiences, but how do they bring that uniqueness to the table? How do we allow them to do that so that they can unlock their individual potential? And by unlocking their individual potential, we are going to maximize our organizational potential, right? Because all of our employees are bringing their best selves to work. And in doing that, it's a very collaborative environment, right? So making sure that our employees all have a voice, whether it be cross-functional teams, surveys, whatever methodology we choose. But making sure that our employees are heard and that they do have a voice. And then we debate that. As I mentioned earlier, it's supporting decisions after robust debate. And that is because we want our employees giving their ideas, and we want to challenge the status quo. And then once a decision is made, we're going to support it, and we're all going to move in that same direction. So I would agree with you completely, Jennifer, in the levers. And I'd like to say that there are things that I can see that we are doing at AdCore that fit those levers. And then in listening to everyone today, I'm sure there are things that I can take away and say, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. Maybe we should try something new. So, but I would agree.
Well, Angel, what about leadership development? That's one thing Chester mentioned a few minutes ago. As Jennifer says, leaders, executives, they all have to lead differently now. So what are you doing to help people think maybe in a little bit different perspective post-COVID?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things that we're doing. We have many of our leaders that are going through 360s, right? So they're going through 360s with different firms to understand what their strengths or superpowers are, to understand what maybe some of their development opportunities are, and the way that they should look at leading going forward. And we really do some 360s through the lens of being the leader potentially the leader we want to be versus the leader in the current role that we have, right? So we have our team members go and look at that, and we learn from that. And then the other thing that we do that I think is incredibly important is we have within our performance management process a requirement with every one of our leaders are required to have a 30-minute one-on-one monthly with all of their direct reports. And in that one-on-one, there is a guideline. And in the guideline, there are some things you're to talk about. We are to talk about our mission. We are to talk about our values. We are to talk about our strategic priorities. But also what we are required to do is to ask our employees, how can I better support you? What do you need me to stop doing? What do you need me to start doing? What do you need me to continue to do? What do you need from me for you to get your job done? And those place on a monthly basis. And so our leaders are having those conversations, and they can learn from there and then look for ways to meet the needs their employees have or expectations employees have for them.
I love that specific. I can see people writing that down right now as you're going through those ideas. That's great. Jeanne, what are your thoughts on Jennifer's, the research they found and those criteria? What do you feel?
Yeah, I also agree. Flexibility and support from managers is really key. And that's also what we are espousing to our teams here at Henry Street Settlement. I love what Angel said about 360s. That's really important. I mean, I was actually just thinking this morning that I would love to have one for myself. Yeah, I mean, it's really about caring for your employees and then being flexible and being positive. I mean, something that I've adopted recently is I just don't want to say no to people, right? If someone brings in a suggestion and they have input, they have an idea, it's not for me to say no. It's maybe for me to say not now or let me think about it. But really taking that approach to stay positive, flexible, and supportive is key.
It's so interesting. Adrienne and I have a practice where you eliminate the words no and but and however, because however is just a dressed up, no, right? And you substitute yes and, it's a great little yes, and maybe we do this 10 years from now. It's a soft way to let people down. Angel, I want to go back to you really quick because, we love to celebrate the successes, the things that we do that are really good. Have you done anything that, you can give our listeners a heads up, like, don't do this? Adrienne and I, in our book, Leading with Gratitude, we tell this story where I wanted to celebrate Adrienne. And so I got him to come to this big sales meeting, away from his family and meet people he'd never met and present him with a watch because I noticed that he didn't wear watches. And clearly, I love watches. Everybody should love watches. And we got this really cool special edition Men in Black watch, only to find out I didn't know Adrienne very well at that time, that he would much rather be with his family. He doesn't like to be in big situations where he doesn't know people. And the reason he doesn't wear a watch is because he basically hates watches. So if
anybody wants to buy a watch, I've actually got one.
Yeah, in mint condition, right? So what are some of the things or some heads up on stuff that you did that, had the best intentions, right? And just didn't work out that well. Do you have any of those stories for us?
Well, I'm not really sure I have any stories, but what I would say is I think, as I alluded earlier, I think don't go into recognition thinking it always has to have a monetary component. So, because so often people think there needs to be a monetary component and there doesn't, right? A simple thank you goes a long way, a genuine thank you. I think being very genuine in your recognition is also important. And then I think lastly, know your audience. And you mentioned that very, very well. And if you are truly listening to your employees and getting to know your employees, then you should know your audience and understand what recognitions are important for them, what goes a long way. To your point, some people do not like a public praise. They do not like public recognition. They would prefer their recognition in private. There are others that just get pumped by being recognized in front of others, right? So I think it's know your audience. So know your audience as you're getting ready to recognize them, number one. Number two, be genuine with your recognition, not because you want to recognize 10 people a day, so you just have to go figure out who those 10 people are, but you're very genuine in it. And understand that it doesn't always have to have a monetary component. And I think those three are very important.
Yeah.
And Chester, I just want to jump in. It is really important to stay away from virtue signaling, right? So you don't do something just for show or just to, again, it has to be genuine, because that happens in my space in the not-for-profit. People jump on the bandwagon when there's an issue, or but it really helps to be really genuine and have teeth to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's always going to be the case, right? I think people can tell when you're checking the box. HR called me, and like to your point, Angel, I'm supposed to recognize 10 people a day. You're number 8, so I'm almost done. That kind of thing.
That also goes for development, though. Like HR called me, and they're forcing me through this development. Never works. And I think the only thing I would add is, and we've learned this the hard way so many times, if HR or the leaders who are not the executives want something, whether it's development or a certain type of recognition or an idea, Jeannie, I love that you're like, I'm trying not to say and never say no. Angel, it sounds like your CEO is incredibly evolved. That is not the majority, I would say. And if you're pushing, and if you find yourself in a leadership role or in an HR role, pushing an organization farther or faster than an executives are willing, I think it could be a recipe for disaster. And I'll just give you a really specific example. At a huge company recently, we did an inclusive organization assessment, and the leaders were so eager to see the results, to get development. But when the CEO found out the results and found out what we were doing, because HR had organized this, he shut the whole thing down. He wasn't ready to see it. He wasn't ready to acknowledge it or address it. And that was a really hard lesson for us.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, one of the things that I'm always talking about in our organization with my HR team and then with my peers, the executive leadership team, is when we're introducing anything into the organization, we have to understand what I call palatable for the organization, right? You can't go from A to Z. You have to go A, B, C, maybe you can get to M and you go to Z, because the organization needs to be able, one, to be ready and to digest it. And if you introduce things at a pace that is palatable for the organization, you're going to reach success. If you push too much, too hard, too fast, that the organization is not ready, number one, you're going to cause chaos. And number two, it's going to fail. And once it fails, we all know it takes years and years and years to reintroduce a concept that has failed. So it's always very, very critical to make sure that you introduce something that is palatable at the time of the maturation level or the stage that the organization is in. Which comes pull versus a push, to Jennifer's point.
Yeah, so well said, Angel. Yeah, you're right. It's where are we? And it's taking those little baby steps. Before we leave this idea of recognition, just that one of the things you've talked about is defining your own recognition brand, whether as a person or as a company. Help us understand that idea of recognition brand.
Yeah, I think leaders, they have their brands. I mean, your companies have a brand. And what is your brand? We've seen leaders, for example, where their brand is a handwritten note. And they're machines. And, particularly if it's coming from like the CEO or someone you really respect, those are treasured. I've even had executives pull stuff out of their wallet. They're taking this little note and it's a dog ear that they've had for 5 or 10 years. Others, as Angel, you mentioned with your CEO, it's meals. It's going out and eating together. And it's really interesting. I'm of the opinion that that's kind of a sacred moment when we break bread together. And so what is it that you're known for? But one of the things that I'd love to throw out to the group, and we get a lot of pushback on this as we, preach and teach the gospel of gratitude and recognition, is frequency. I think that's part of a leader's brand too. You've got leaders that really hold back. The old expression, I don't give a lot of recognition, but when I do, people know I mean it. I remember back in 1979, I said, people went crazy, So I'd love your input on this idea of, you said, Angel, you're kind of getting into the cadence and so on. How much recognition is enough and how much is too much? Is there such a thing as too much? And Jeannie, you use recognition really well in the nonprofit area. Have you seen leaders where with their leadership brand where it's really over the top, it's not enough? And where do you find that balance and how do you coach them up?
Well, our milestone event is once a year, but our CEO, he likes to make the rounds. So he'll just show up unannounced and, give some praise or recognition. And it's great because he definitely is very hands-on and goes visiting all the different programs at his leisure. But it's effective because people love when he pops up and seeing him, and he gives great bear hugs. And I also wanted to mention, because this came up yesterday, in employment, even though Lillian Wald, our founder, established the visiting nurse service, she also provided employment services by helping people and giving them jobs and sewing buttons on the nurses' uniforms. And we have a little trinket, it's a little thimble that we give out to people with Henry Street's name on it in recognition of our legacy and history. But also my CEO likes to say our work is like emptying the ocean one thimble at a time.
Yeah, that's a little daunting, isn't it? A thimble at a time. Angel, what do you do when you've got a leader that doesn't get it, and it's just all about the numbers, and you come to work, and that's why we call it work, and it's work. How do you coach up leaders and get them converted to this idea that recognition actually is an essential part of your leadership brand?
Yeah, again, I think the coaching is really around helping our leaders understand who we are as a company, right? What our values, our culture of engagement and alignment, the behaviors that are important to us, and the behaviors of a leader, and what we expect from a leader. And we actually have the leadership behaviors that we've recognized, and then we give examples of what those behaviors are, and it's all in a small plaque, and I don't have it in front of me, but it's like a little crystal that sits on our desk that says these are the leadership behaviors and the what we expect, right? Actions associated with them. And our leaders really get it, right? And they drive for it. In the event we have a leader that doesn't, we always have a conversation, right? You're going to coach a leader on what the appropriate behaviors are, potentially offer a opportunity for development to go and hone in on a skill set. Maybe it's emotional intelligence or an interpersonal skill that's missing, and we'll give them every opportunity and work with them to really develop those. But really, it's about making sure that our employees understand who we are and who we are as a business and what the expectations are. And at the end of the day, it's modeling the behaviors. So when leaders see, or you see your peers modeling the behaviors, obviously you understand what those behaviors are and you model them as well. And we have had leaders at all levels that didn't potentially work to those expectations, that either self-selected or have left the organization, because the leadership behaviors are critically important to us.
Isn't it interesting too, when the leaders start to model that behavior, it gives everybody else permission, right? So Jen, I want you to, what your thoughts are on this. And then I'd love to ask each one of you, what was your favorite recognition moment? Like, what was it that meant the most to you? But Jen, add to the conversation here. What are you thinking?
Well, actually, this is fascinating because I'm thinking about myself as a leader. I'm thinking about the leaders that we coach. And the original question was, is there such thing as too much recognition, too much celebration? And then separately, what is your kind of recognition brand? So starting with the recognition brand, I saw our friend Scott Miller, who runs the On Leadership podcast, post on Facebook this week that he was writing his, 3,000th thank you note in honor of the people that have contributed to the book coming out. And my first thought was, God bless you. Like, what a nightmare. Like, there's no way I would do that. It just gives me anxiety to think about it. So I started thinking, but what my recognition brand is it's more in the moment throughout the day. So it's not like one email a day or 5 thank you notes a week. And I do think there is such thing as a too much celebration recognition culture, especially if you're also not acknowledging the tough pieces or the challenges. And so if we're only recognizing and celebrating and the company's not hitting its targets, actually it's going to end up hurting all of us, right? And so what's that right balance of honoring and recognizing and celebrating and acknowledging when things aren't going well and we can't celebrate? We actually need to come together. And that balance is really tricky. It's tricky for leaders and for organizations.
Yeah, yeah. So the wrap-up question, what was your favorite recognition moment? I'll start with you, Jeannie, and then we'll go to Jen and over to Angel. Was there a moment where a leader came in and it really, all these years later, you still remember?
Yeah, actually, it's recent. One of the leaders gave out superlatives because we finished a specific project, and I got a most likely to lead a quiet rebellion. And it just, I felt so heard and seen. So that was really nice. And
So lead the quiet rebellion. That's great. Angel, what was your favorite recognition moment?
So we have an annual business conference, and I joined AdCore in 2014 as the Vice President of Human Resources for our plastic piping conduit business unit at the time. And we have this annual business conference, and at this annual business conference, we have a gala. And at the gala, we give out annual awards. And to get an annual award, you have to be nominated, right? So someone nominates you for an award, and the reason. And our awards are based on our values, accountability, teamwork, integrity, respect, and excellence. And then we have a Presidential Leadership Award, which is the highest award you can achieve. And it is given out by the CEO. Okay. And so if you think about all of the peers, your peers, all the employees can nominate you, and then it goes up to the executive leadership team, which are the direct reports of the CEO, and then they go through and they pick the top 2 or 3 and then pass it to the CEO, and he approves. But for presidential leadership, he then chooses that person. And in 2015, I actually received the Presidential Leadership Award at the gala. So it was so exciting. I still remember it to this day. You get a crystal and you get the recognition in front of your peers, which is fun. I mean, believe it or not, I'm usually very talkative, really outgoing, and so I kind of like being in public, and I like all that. And I like, the party and the atmosphere. But I don't necessarily like that all the time, is the believe it or not piece. But this was amazing, right? You have all your colleagues around. And I think what was really, really meant the most to me is, when I joined, there was a lot of work in acquiring businesses and taking 8 operating companies and consolidating, integrating them into one. Same HRIS system, same payroll system, same policies, practices, so on and so forth. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, right? If you think about the change management, you think about the cultural changes, because you got 8 different businesses that you've pulled in that you're making one business. And oh, by the way, some of those businesses were competitors. So previous life. So it was just an understanding that all the sleepless nights and long hours were recognized, I think, is what probably really meant the most. And you know what it did for me? It made me want to work harder, faster, longer for the team. So that's my most memorable.
Yeah, that's so great. And you're right. The ripple effect is, wow, they really do value me. I can't let them down. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work longer. So Jen, what's your favorite? And it can be a tennis championship that you've won. By the way, it doesn't have to be just work.
Now that you opened all that up, I would say then being the MVP of the high school championship basketball team and celebrating together a win that we had never expected was probably one of my most memorable moments. The work one was leaving when I was, I don't know if it was a promotion or a lateral move really, but I was moving on from one job to another, and my team surprised me with kind of a recognition very small and intimate party where there were speeches and written notes and funny stories. And it was just such a special, and it's reminded me how important it is to create those moments, especially in transition for recognition.
Excellent. But, before I turn it over to Adrian, I MVP of the basketball tournament. So my question is, when you dunk the ball, do you like showboat and hang on the rim, or
360, or do you just? Yeah.
Well, I'll stand up in the video and you'll see I'm 6'3", really.
That's great. Hey, and I love that idea of, doing goodbyes well. I'm working with a company. It's a restaurant company, and they're realizing sometimes people will come work for us for 2 weeks, and that's okay. Let's send them away well. Maybe they'll come back. And so I love that idea of really creating, nice ways, the rituals that we send people off. So one of the other things I noticed we have about 9 minutes left. So we're going to start wrapping up for everybody. But I think this is a good question. And we're going to start with our resident attorney, because when we think of empathy, we typically think of attorneys, right, Jeanne? And so how are you helping your leaders throughout your organization develop more compassion and empathy when it may not be naturally part of who they are, but as we've all talked about, that has to be part of our culture going forward, especially part of our leadership brand?
Well, obviously, when you're thinking about the question, you care about something, right? You care about either the result or the bottom line. So linking, your why and to your goals and really being able to articulate your purpose, you get better results with intentionality and honesty. So if you know what it is you're going after and the why, and you care, it will shine through. It helps to know your own biases and triggers when you're developing relationships and people who report to you. That way you're aware of, pitfalls or things that could go wrong before you go into the conversation, or so that you have control over it. I find that it's helpful to play scientist, actually, which is related to being an attorney. Like, be curious. Use every interaction you have to collect data about the person or the individual that you're trying to develop and support. And those techniques really go a long way. Again, stay positive, like the not saying no. So to summarize, just over prepare as much as you can for difficult conversations, and always find a silver lining, even when things go a little awry.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, get to know their stories. Yeah, be curious about that. Now, Angel, you're in a very technical organization. I mean, you're manufacturing. You got a lot of engineering minds there working there, and some of them are probably going, how important is this really? So how do you convince them or help them to be more compassionate in the workplace?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, it is, I always tell people, build a personal relationship. Start with a personal relationship. Get to know the individual. Get to know what's important to them. Have those conversations. If you build the right personal relationship, your professional relationship is going to blossom, right? Because you're going to build trust and credibility because you genuinely care about them as a person. So I think that's really, really important. And then furthermore, the coaching would be, particularly for someone who would be a little bit more technical minded, is think about it in your own personal situation, right? So first of all, one of the things we always say at AdCore is treat others the way you want to be treated. So if you think about a situation that your employee is going through, very few employees, if any, come to work wanting to make mistakes or wanting to not really work hard. Very few. So if they're not performing or if they're not working hard, then there's an underlying reason. So try to understand that, right? So the first thing you do before you go on a conversation is say, if it were me, if I were the individual and my boss was going to come in and have a conversation with me, how would I want them to treat me, right? And if you think about it through that mindset, then you're going to go in, you're going to treat them with respect, you're going to treat them with dignity, you're going to understand, you're going to ask questions. To Jeannie's point, you're going to be curious, you're going to understand what happened, and then manage that appropriately. So understand the root cause and really manage it from a personal standpoint.
And I love the theme that's developing here of bringing the humanity back. Jen, I was about to give a presentation to a big another manufacturing company, certainly not Adcore, but one that where the chairman, he says, "Oh, you're going to be talking about engagement and culture." He says, "They can get that if they want to go to church. Here they're going to do their work." And so that's what I greeted as I got up on stage. And so, how do you work with somebody that's just not getting? I mean, you coach a lot of leaders.
Yeah, and this is where self-awareness comes in. I love when Jeanne said, like, I'd love to have a 360, and a lot of leaders aren't that open to that. So, interestingly, we're talking about empathy as we look at kind of the what has transpired over the last few years. Words that we really never used before to describe really effective leaders are now bubbling up to the surface. Empathy is one, vulnerability, humility, transparency. These are all the words now that we're using to describe the most effective leaders. And we've actually proven that through a lot of our assessment data that we have. But how do you actually encourage or allow a leader to hold up that mirror and say, I actually want to become more self-aware? So one of the biggest ahas that we have when we deliver our inclusive leader assessment, it's a short assessment with 16 very specific behaviors that measure the types of things that we're talking about right now. Most leaders, if they're willing to do it, and that's the first step, are super surprised that they think they are way more effective than they actually are, because they rank themselves as higher on all those behaviors than their direct reports or even their peers. And so making that awareness or creating that awareness through visibility and then helping to coach and have them accept that feedback, it takes courage for them, and it takes discipline and commitment. And you can't force that to happen, but more and more leaders, I think, are becoming more open because the way they've been doing it in the past is no longer working.
Yeah. I want you to close out for us because, with the pandemic, there was, it seemed, at least the data that we looked at, there was a lot more pressure on women than men. And I know one of Linkage's missions is to really promote female leaders. What are you doing there to mitigate that difference?
Whew, that's a bigger topic than we have 3 minutes.
Seconds, by the way.
Yeah, in 10 seconds or less, Jen.
Yeah. So one of the things we do to change the face of leadership is that literal, helping women and people of color advance into more senior leadership roles. One of the ways we do that is by supporting all leaders to become more inclusive and effective. So really quickly, yes, it was hard. COVID was hard on all of us, but there were 2 times more jobs lost for women. The women that stayed in the workforce tended to be the more college-educated women. They became 2 times more burnt out than men because they were doing more of the non-paid, non-recognized work with their teams in the terms of coaching and mentoring and supporting and helping them with work-life balance. And we know the new data will come out in the next couple months from McKinsey, but we know that 1 in 3 women as of the top of the year were saying, like, time out. I'm either going to downshift in my role or I'm going to leave the workforce altogether. So that is a crisis that we are working on. Women of color fared even worse. So what the best organizations are doing are a fewfold. One, they're starting at the executive level. I don't know if I have a time for a shout out for Tom Greco, the CEO of Advance Auto, stood up alongside me in a virtual keynote and said, I am going to lead the way in executive sponsorship. Every single one of my direct reports and their direct reports are going to swarm our top 35, 40 women of color because we care about them staying and their engagement and their development. So that's just a super example of what I call executive action. But the second thing is the investment in these underrepresented populations. For women specifically, we see the best companies investing in them, not only through executive sponsorship and access to stretch assignments, but also giving them the time and the focus for them to work on themselves for their own development. And our Women in Leadership Institute is one of the best examples of that. We've got huge companies and small companies like Toyota and Disney and Oracle. Hundreds of women.
Companies, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that, Jen. I wanted to make sure we brought that in because I know you're passionate about it. It's a huge issue. We'll have to have you all back to expound on that. Listen, Jeanne, Jennifer, Angel, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to give you each 3 seconds to say, Jeanne, where can we find more about Henry Street? Give a shout out so we can support you in your wonderful work.
Yes, please go to henrystreet.org. We are also on social media, but the website is probably the easiest.
Excellent. Angel, Adcore. Where do we find more about you?
Adcore.com.
Easy.
Oh, that's easy.
And I'm guessing linkage.com.
linkageinc.com, or you can Google Linkage Women in Leadership Institute, get straight to our website.
Excellent. Adrian, I'll leave it to you to wrap up this engaging conversation.
Well, thank you, Jeannie, Angel, Jennifer, for bringing your insights. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We've had such an amazing discussion. Thank you to Vantage Circle for putting this on. And until next time, we wish you the best of luck as you develop your organizational culture.
Take care, everybody. Be well.
Bye-bye.